In my Getting Started series, I introduced you to R notebooks, and you acquired the basic fundamentals that you're going to need in order to use R notebooks. In this video, I want to show you a few of the advanced features that we will be using during this course. First, let me tell you about this header. That is the section between the three dashes that begin the header and the section for the three dashes after the header. This is referred to as the YAML. YAML stands for YAML Ain't Markup Language. The individuals who develop this kind of stuff have a really weird, nerdy sense of humor. If you think about this, that the Y stands for YAML, it's recursive. Basically, it's an infinite loop, but don't let that keep you awake at night. The YAML can contain much information. Now, we're primarily going to have a title, an author, perhaps a date, and then the kind of output we want. But the YAML can also define the creation of a table of contents. It can tell how large the figures should be that are within your R notebook. There's a whole variety of options available for the YAML, and you may choose to use those at some point, but there are too many for me to discuss in this short video. But we will have references that you can access if you choose to use some of the more advanced features available in the YAML. Let's focus for a minute on this output type, HTML notebook. The HTML notebook is what allows us to preview, so that if I click on this little preview button, I can get a preview of what my notebook's going to look like. But there are other options. We can create this as an HTML file to read in a browser. If we have the correct packages installed, we can create a PDF file, and we can even create a Microsoft Word document. If I choose any of these, notice that it changes the output type. This looks very similar to what I had before, but this is now for specifically a web browser. Notice that this has changed from preview to knit. If I want to get it back to preview, which is normally what I end up using, I can simply change this back to HTML notebook and save, and now the preview button is back. So this is the type of output that we will use most often, but I want you to be aware that these other knit types are available. Let's continue to look at the other icons that we have available when we have a notebook open. This can be a terrible pain so that we can see our code here in a separate window, and we could have separate notebooks side by side. Let me put that back. We also have some options that can be useful. For example, let's suppose that we want to preview instead of in a separate window within RStudio. We can preview in the viewer pane. Now when I click the preview button, I have a nice preview right down here. Notice none of the output is showing right now. That's because one of the steps I took inadvertently got rid of all the output. To get it to show again, I can simply click on the Run button, run all. The output will now be there. And now when I preview, here we have the output. We can also clear that output. Right here is clear all output. We have options for the output. Here you can specify the size of the figures. If you do that, it will change up here in the YAML. So let's suppose I made it 7. Notice that it automatically enters into the YAML. I'm going to change it back to the default simply by getting rid of the code. Now, anytime we create a header, our notebook sees this as a new section. And if we go all the way over here to the right, there's a little icon that will show us what our sections are. If I click on any of those, it will take us right to that section. So now I'm in the conclusions section. Another way we can do this is to use these little arrows that will go from one section or code chunk to the next. So now if I start at the beginning and click the down arrow, it goes to a code chunk, then it goes to the description section, then it goes to the analysis section, then it goes to the next code chunk, and so on. Whatever is the next thing in line, the code chunk or the section, it will go to. The run has some nice features, like running the current chunk, but we can do that simply by clicking on this little green arrow. A very useful feature is to run all chunks above, but I normally do that with this little down arrow and the little green bar. The reason that's such a good feature is because if you have not run anything and you try to run a code chunk, the code chunk may include objects that need to be defined earlier in the notebook. So by clicking on this, I can run everything up above to make sure that all those objects are defined before I use them in the current code chunk. One more thing I want to show you. Whenever you run a preview, it is going to create a file that has the same name as the notebook, but also has .nb.html. That stands for Notebook HTML. Now that's different from just HTML. This was created when I showed you how we could knit to HTML. When I chose this to knit to HTML, it created this file. All this is an HTML file, meaning that we can open it and look at it in our browser. So if I click on this and view it in, say, the editor, it's going to just be HTML code. If I click and view it in the browser, I'm actually going to see output. So here is the output in HTML format. But what's different about this file is this file contains both the notebook and the HTML. So it's like packaging together the notebook and the HTML file, the RMD file and the HTML. So this one, this RMD, and this one, the HTML, are all packaged together. So if I click on this and it asks me to open an editor, now it's not going to open the HTML code, it's actually going to open my R notebook. So let me close the R notebook that I had. Let me just start with a scratched notebook here. And now let me click on this, click open in editor, and you'll see that it actually opens my R notebook. So the notebook is embedded within this. If I had chosen to view it in the web browser, then we would get the same thing that you saw a moment ago. That is, we would get the output in my web browser. So this is a convenient way if you're working with a colleague who's also developing in R and you want to send them the notebook and the output to look at both at once, you can send this. Now in this class, I actually prefer that you just send me the notebook because I can always create the HTML file from the notebook. The notebook is in a small file, so it makes things really compact. And it's also in a plain text file. This is how I prefer you give me, but I want to show you what happens when you preview how you create this nb.html file. There are many more features we could look at, but these are the main ones I want you to know about, and you can always use the resources, many of which I'll provide with links on Blackboard, to learn about new features if you would like to do so, or if you ever need them.